Have you ever noticed that even though we live in the safest era of human history, we are paradoxically the most anxious generation of all time? Look around. Men afraid to flirt with women, parents who won't let their children climb trees, adults who check the weather forecast 3 times before a picnic, an entire society paralyzed by fear, by risks, by anxiety. To understand how we got here, let me introduce someone. Let's call him Michael. He's not special. In fact, that's exactly why his story matters. Because Michael is the face of this epidemic. An ordinary man with a seemingly perfect life, except for the fact that he was very insecure. It all started when Michael was at a playground, watching his son. But this isn't a playground he would recognize from childhood. The ground isn't gravel or grass. Instead, it's a thick, spongy rubber surface, designed specifically to absorb the impact of any fall. The climbing structure is no longer made of metal, but of rounded plastic close to the ground. Each swing has a 3-point seatbelt, the kind you'd find in a car seat. His 6-year-old son, Leo, looks at a small plastic climbing wall. It's barely 5 feet tall. Leo looks at his father, and in his eyes there's a question. But it's not the question Michael expected. It's not, "Can I climb?" Instead, it's, "Is it safe to climb?" In that moment, something inside Michael breaks. A memory hits him with the force of a wave. He sees himself at 8 years old, perched at the top of a giant oak tree in his grandfather's backyard. He remembers the wind in his face, that unique cocktail of fear and wild pride, the feeling that the whole world stretched out beneath his feet. There was no rubber coating on the ground below. No one asked for permission. There was only the tree, the sky, and the choice. He quickly returns to the present. The smile on his face seems forced as he gives Leo a thumbs up. "Sure, champ. Just don't climb too high, okay?" The words leave his mouth before he realizes it, and the next instant, Michael hears what he just said. Really hears it. Was that him talking? Or was it the voice of someone he'd become without noticing? That night, Michael can't sleep. He turns to one side, to the other. The phrase echoes, "Just don't climb too high." When did this become his life philosophy? He gets up, goes to the kitchen, comes back, sits on the edge of the bed. The feeling of suffocation doesn't pass. He gives up, picks up his phone, starts typing into Google, almost without thinking. Why am I afraid of everything? Constant anxiety causes. The answers are generic. Symptoms, medications, therapy. Nothing that explains that specific feeling. So he tries something different. Why does our generation have so much fear? That's when he falls into an article, then another, charts, statistics. And the more he reads, the clearer the picture becomes. Paradoxical, disturbing. The data doesn't lie. Life expectancy is 30 years longer than that of his great-grandparents. Deaths in wars have fallen to a fraction of what they were before. Natural disasters, pandemics, famine, all the great scythes of human history seem to have become dull and rusted. By any objective measure, he, his son, and everyone he knows are living in the safest chapter of human history. And yet, the fever of anxiety is everywhere. He sees it in the other parents huddled at the school gate, whispering about allergies and screen time. In the headlines flooding his phone, each one screaming about a new threat. In work emails announcing yet another wellness protocol or safety initiative. That's when he finds the words of sociologist Barry Glassner in his book, The Culture of Fear, and they hit him with the clarity of a punch to the gut. We are living in the most alarmist moment in human history. And the main reason for this is that there is a lot of power and money available to individuals and organizations that can perpetuate these fears. Suddenly, everything makes sense. Michael begins to see the tentacles of this industry infiltrating every corner of daily life. Pharmaceutical companies that turned natural worry into medical condition, generalized anxiety, panic disorder, all requiring treatment, all generating profit. He sees it in politicians who sell protection in exchange for votes and power. He sees it in media outlets that learn to turn every statistical anomaly into an imminent crisis. because fear generates clicks and clicks generate revenue. He closes the laptop, but the feeling doesn't leave him. In fact, it intensifies. It's as if, for the first time, he has truly seen the bars of his cage. A cage built with the best intentions, padded for his comfort and safety, sold to him as protection. But still, undeniably, a cage. He looks out the window at his quiet, safe street, where nothing happens and nothing will happen. A question haunts him, a question for which he has no immediate answer. How did we get here? And more importantly, how exactly does the culture of fear manage to frighten us even in such a safe age? The question becomes an obsession for Michael. He begins to read voraciously, not as an academic seeking academic credits, but as a prisoner studying the causes of his own imprisonment. He dives deep into history, anthropology, and philosophy. A question won't leave Michael's mind. Have we always been like this? Has humanity always lived paralyzed by fear, avoiding risks, asking permission to exist? Or was there a different time? He needs to know. He needs to understand if this fragility is our essence or if it's something we've recently constructed. And then, in those pages, he finds something unexpected. Echoes, ghosts of a different kind of humanity. He starts with ancient Rome. He reads about virtues, courage, excellence, audacity, considered the greatest of all human qualities. He discovers that fortune favors the brave wasn't a cliché printed on motivational posters. It was a life principle, a compass for navigating an uncertain world. In that culture, risk wasn't something to be avoided at all costs. It was seen as the very stage where destiny was forged, where greatness was born. He moves forward to Renaissance Florence. He reads about Leonardo da Vinci in his workshop. Here was a man who saw no boundaries between art and engineering, between the known and the unknown. Michael discovers that the Renaissance ideal of the universal man didn't fear failure. Da Vinci saw failure as a given, as a necessary and even valuable step on the path of creation. For him and his contemporaries, risk was simply the price of genius, the admission fee to the realm of discovery. Then, Michael dives into the Enlightenment philosophers. He finds voices echoing across the centuries. Immanuel Kant proclaimed, sapere aude, which means dare to know. For these thinkers, reason was a torch meant to illuminate the darkness, and fear was that darkness, something to be actively dispelled. The unknown wasn't a threat to be contained and avoided. Instead, it was a territory to be mapped, understood, and ultimately dominated by the power of the human mind. These people, these entire eras, weren't naive. Michael realizes something crucial. They knew plague, famine, and war on a scale he could barely conceive. Danger was real to them. It was omnipresent, a constant companion. And yet, their response wasn't to shrink from life, to build ever smaller boxes of safety. Instead, their response was to expand, to go further. They understood something fundamental, that uncertainty was a portal with two directions. Yes, one led to danger and loss, but the other direction led to opportunity, to discovery, to human greatness. Michael feels a pang of shame, shame for himself, shame for his generation. What happened to that flame? When did it go out and extinguish? His research leads him to identify a crucial turning point. There was a silent shift that occurred sometime in the last decades of the 20th century. It was when the optimistic belief in humanity's capacity to conquer the unknown, to push boundaries and solve problems, gradually gave way to something darker. It was replaced by a pessimistic conviction that we are fundamentally fragile, that we are essentially powerless before the dangers that surround us. At some point along the way, we stopped seeing ourselves as conquerors of uncertainty. Instead, we became hostages of the unpredictable. Michael looks at his own hands of a man who checks the weather forecast 3 times before planning a simple picnic. The hands of someone who reads dozens of online reviews before buying a blender, who feels a genuine pang of panic if his son climbs just 1 step higher than expected on the slide. He finally understands something fundamental. The cage he feels isn't made of steel bars or written rules that someone else imposed. It's made of something much more subtle and, for that very reason, much stronger and harder to escape. As soon as Michael recognizes the existence of this mental cage, as soon as he sees it clearly for the first time, he begins to notice its code everywhere he looks. It's like discovering a hidden pattern. It operates as an invisible filter that distorts reality. He sees it at Leo's school, when a planned field trip to a nearby forest is cancelled. The stated reason isn't a real and present danger. Instead, it's the potential for danger, the mere possibility of something going wrong. A sprained ankle, an allergic reaction to a plant, the remote, almost statistical possibility of encountering a wild animal. The entire experience of learning and exploring nature is sacrificed on the altar of what if. He sees it in himself when an old college friend invites him to go rock climbing. Michael notices his own thought process, and it disturbs him. The first question that arises in his mind isn't, "What an incredible adventure! What could I see? What could I experience?" Instead, his mind immediately jumps to, "What's the probability of an accident? What could go wrong? What's the worst-case scenario?" The hierarchy of his questions has been completely inverted without him even noticing. Fear always speaks first now. It has the loudest voice in the room. He realizes that language itself has been corrupted, slowly and systematically. The word risk, which for the ancient Romans and for Leonardo da Vinci meant opportunity, bravery, and the chance for greatness, has become a curse word in modern conversation. Now it's used as a synonym for stupidity and irresponsibility. And most troubling is that Michael himself was an agent of this linguistic shift. He remembers calling a colleague reckless for leaving a secure job to start his own business. He remembers the critical look he cast at a mother in the park who wasn't constantly hovering over her child. Unwittingly, without even realizing it, he became an enforcer of prudence, a guardian of the cage. One day, at work, a new psychological safety policy is announced in a company-wide meeting. The stated objective seems quite reasonable. Any idea that might offend or disturb someone should be avoided. But as he hears the details, Michael notices something troubling. The real objective isn't the pursuit of truth or innovation. It's not about solving problems or creating something new. Instead, it's about creating a frictionless environment, a space without challenges or discomfort. It's a rubber playground, but this time designed for adults. Michael feels a chill down his spine. This isn't protection. This is intellectual castration, the systematic removal of anything that might cause growth through friction. He remembers a quote from Nietzsche he'd read years earlier in college. "The secret of harvesting from existence, the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment is to live dangerously. Build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius. Send your ships into uncharted seas. Live at war with your peers and yourselves." At the time, the phrase seemed poetic but distant, something that applied to ancient warriors or fictional heroes, not to him. Now it sounds like a direct accusation, a finger pointing straight at his chest. Michael feels suffocated by this logic, this mental architecture. It's a logic that, like a virus infecting the mind, always imagines the worst possible outcome and then acts as if that outcome is not just possible, but probable, even inevitable. But where did this logic come from? It couldn't be just a cultural accident, just random bad luck. There had to be an engine somewhere, a force actively promoting and spreading this way of thinking. He looks again at his computer screen, at the corporate slogans and government orders crowding his inbox, and a dark understanding begins to emerge. The code isn't just a mental virus spreading by accident. It's the operating system of a new form of power, deliberately designed and carefully maintained. The question that remains is, who's writing the program? Who benefits from keeping everyone inside the cage? The answer comes to Michael in the most unexpected place. while reading the instruction manual for a new coffee maker he'd just bought. The manual is 12 pages total, and 11 of them are dedicated entirely to warnings. Warnings about steam burns, warnings about hot water, warnings about electric shock, warnings about using the appliance near children, near pets, or during a storm. By the time he finishes reading, the machine seems less like a household appliance and more like some kind of dangerous artifact requiring specialized training to operate. He laughs, but it's a hollow laugh without joy, because there it is, right in front of him in miniature, the principle that governs his entire life. It's called the precautionary principle, and it goes like this. In the face of any degree of uncertainty, no matter how small, the only rational response is caution, protection, and ultimately, inaction. And this principle is the cornerstone of a new religion that has quietly installed itself at the heart of modern society. Michael calls it the Cathedral of Safety. Like any religion, it has its own set of unquestionable dogmas, sacred truths that cannot be challenged. The phrase, "We're doing this for your safety," has become the 21st century equivalent of "Thus says the Lord." It's a statement that ends any debate, that silences any question. One cannot argue with safety. To do so is to label yourself as dangerous. This religion also has its mandatory rituals, practices that must be performed even when they make no logical sense. Wearing the right equipment, even when it serves no practical purpose. Filling out the right forms, even when no one will ever read them. It's security theatre, a performance where the appearance of protection has become more important than protection itself. And crucially, like all religions, it has a punishment system for heretics, for those who dare to question the faith. Those who challenge the dogmas aren't simply treated as people with different opinions. They're labelled as morally flawed, fundamentally dangerous, blasphemers against the common good. Michael feels the fear of this social excommunication in his own bones every time he thinks about challenging the consensus, about speaking up in a meeting or at the school board. The high priest of this new faith is a mysterious and all-powerful entity that everyone refers to as the science. And here's the crucial distinction that Michael finally grasps. This isn't science with a lowercase s, the humble, skeptical, and always provisional method of investigation he learned in school. This is the science with capital letters, treated as a source of divine decrees, infallible and unquestionable. The science says, has become the beginning of every sermon, every mandate, every behavior restriction. Questioning the science is treated as heresy, as a kind of secular sin. Real scientists, people with actual credentials and peer-reviewed data, who dare to doubt the orthodoxy of the time, who ask inconvenient questions or present contradictory evidence, are quickly marginalized and demonized. They're treated not as skeptics, which is what scientists should be, but as apostates, as traitors to the faith who must be silenced. Michael sees the perfect trap now, the complete picture. It's a system of control disguised as care. It's an authoritarian ideology disguised as objectivity, wrapped in the language of compassion and concern. And here's what disturbs him most. People, ordinary people like him, applaud this system. They beg for more rules, more restrictions, more protection. A world with zero risk, where nothing bad can happen. Michael feels like a sane man trapped in an insane asylum. He can see the architecture of the prison now. He can hear the sermons of the high priests. He can feel the critical gaze of the other faithful, the believers who consider him dangerous for asking questions. He understands exactly how the machine works, how the gears turn and the levers operate. But one last piece of the puzzle torments him, keeps him awake at night. The promise of this entire system is safety, peace of mind, the absence of fear. So why, he wonders, looking at the anxious and medicated faces around him, at his neighbors, co-workers and other parents, does no one actually seem to feel safe? Why is everyone more anxious than ever? The answer, when Michael finally sees it, is the cruelest paradox of all. The relentless pursuit of safety doesn't generate safety, in fact, not in any real or psychological sense. Instead, it generates more fear. It feeds the very beast from which it claims to be protecting us. Here's how the mechanism works. Each new rule, each new warning, each new safety protocol doesn't whisper to us, "You're safe now, you can relax." Instead, it screams, "There's a danger here you weren't even aware of before." The infinite proliferation of protection measures creates an environment that seems increasingly hostile and threatening. It's a perfect vicious circle, a self-reinforcing cycle. Fear generates rules. Rules signal the presence of danger, and the perception of danger generates even more fear. But Michael discovers that the real cost goes even deeper than this psychological feedback loop. It's not just about feelings, it's about a real erosion of human capacity, a withering of the soul itself. He sees it most clearly in his son, Leo. At school, there's a zero-tolerance policy for conflicts of any kind. What this means in practice is that any small childhood disagreement, any minor argument or little shove, isn't resolved between the children themselves. They don't get the chance to learn to negotiate with each other, to apologize and be sincere, to forgive and move on. Instead, every incident, no matter how trivial, is immediately passed on to adults. Teachers and administrators intervene to solve all problems. The children aren't learning to navigate social complexity on their own. They're learning something very different. They're learning to depend on a higher authority to solve their problems. The implicit message in each of these protective interventions is devastating, though rarely expressed aloud. You're not competent. You're not capable. You need us to survive. Without our constant supervision and intervention, you'll fail, get hurt, be destroyed. It's a pedagogy of fragility, systematically conducted from the cradle. It happens in the family, through overprotective parents and constant supervision. It happens at school, with safe zones, trigger warnings, and zero-tolerance policies. It happens through the media, with its endless stream of threats and catastrophes. The result of all this is the mass production of a specific psychological condition that psychologists have a name for: learned helplessness. It's a state in which a person, after repeated experiences of lack of control, stops trying to exercise control, even when the opportunity finally arises. Michael feels this learned helplessness in himself, in his own reactions. He sees it in his hesitation to fix a leaking pipe himself. Better call a professional, he thinks automatically. He sees it in the anxiety he feels when planning a trip without a detailed, pre-established itinerary. What if something goes wrong? What if he makes a mistake? The idea of improvising, of solving problems as they arise, fills him with dread. It's a slow and constant atrophy, a weakening of the muscles of autonomy and problem solving. The Cathedral of Safety isn't just building cages for people to live in. It's doing something more insidious. It's creating a population that wouldn't even know how to live outside these cages if the doors were suddenly opened. It's systematically infantilizing society, generation after generation, producing adults who long for the firm hand of an authority figure to tell them what to do, what to think, how to feel, and above all, how to feel safe. And here's the final irony, the most bitter truth of all. By handing over his freedom piece by piece in exchange for the promise of safety, Michael didn't gain peace of mind. He didn't achieve the sense of calm and security he was promised. Instead, he gained a different kind of anxiety, perhaps even worse. It's the anxiety of dependence, of knowing deep down that he's powerless. And here's the problem. Objectively speaking, he is, in fact, less safe than before. Because every freedom surrendered, every skill left unpracticed, every challenge avoided, has made him less capable of dealing with a real crisis when it inevitably arrives. When something happens that wasn't in the protocol, that wasn't covered by the safety manual. He's sitting in his perfectly safe living room, in his perfectly safe house, in his perfectly safe neighborhood, and he's never felt so vulnerable in his entire life. This is rock bottom. The logic of the cage seems inescapable. hermetic, perfect in its circular reasoning. The silent fever of fear seems to be a terminal condition, something that will only get worse until it consumes everything. Is this the end of the story then? Is this where it has to conclude? With a slow surrender to safety, a lifetime lived in a whisper, afraid of one's own shadow, waiting for permission to exist? Or is there perhaps another way of being, another path he hasn't seen yet? The change doesn't come from a book or some thundering revelation from on high. It comes from something much simpler, a story his father tells him during a phone call, a story about Michael's grandfather, a man he barely knew before the old man's death. His father tells him that during the Great Depression, Michael's grandfather lost everything he had. His job, his savings, his house, everything. Instead of despairing, instead of giving up and accepting defeat, his grandfather took his last money, bought an old beat-up truck and traveled from state to state, working whatever job he could find. He picked fruit, worked construction, washed dishes, fixed fences. He slept in the truck bed under the stars. He faced hunger, loneliness, and absolute uncertainty about the future. He had no safety net, no insurance, no protocol to follow. And according to Michael's father, his grandfather said later that he never felt as alive as during those years. This story hits Michael like lightning, like thunder cutting across the sky. It's the living refutation of everything he's been taught, of everything he's internalized. It directly contradicts the pessimistic anthropology in which he's been immersed, the core belief that vulnerability is our fundamental essence, that we're fragile creatures who need constant protection just to survive. If this belief were true, if humans were really that fragile, then his grandfather should have crumbled. Humanity itself should have been extinct long ago, decimated by the first drought, the first winter, the first time the hunt went wrong. But that's not what happened. That's not what we are. Michael understands now. Vulnerability isn't our essence. Resilience is the capacity not just to endure hardship when it comes, but to actually grow through it, to be transformed by it into something stronger. Humanity didn't thrive despite danger and uncertainty. In a very real way, we thrived because of it. Challenge is what made us human in the first place. Michael finally grasps something fundamental. The culture of fear, this entire system he's trapped in, isn't an inevitable condition. It's not a law of nature or an immutable fact about modern life. It's a choice. It's a narrative we've been told so frequently, so consistently, through so many channels, that we started to believe it was true. But a narrative can be rejected. A story can be rewritten. A choice can be undone and remade. Liberation, he realizes, won't happen in a single dramatic moment. It won't be one big decision that changes everything overnight. Instead, it will be a gradual process, a journey that happens in 3 stages. The first stage is awareness, seeing the cage clearly for what it is, understanding its mechanisms and how it works, recognizing the invisible code that's running in his mind. This work, he knows, he's already done. He can see it now. The second stage will be cultivation, actively developing an alternative worldview, deliberately building new mental habits, and practicing small acts of courage. Not reckless acts, not stupid risks, but intentional choices to do things that scare him a little. This is what comes next. This is the work ahead. And the third stage, finally, will be action. Actually living according to this new vision, day after day, despite the constant pressure to conform, despite the critical looks and worried warnings. It means making the choice, repeatedly, to value freedom over safety, to value experience over protection, to value life over merely existing. That weekend, Michael takes Leo to the same park they've been to dozens of times. But this time, when Leo looks at the small climbing wall, when that familiar question begins to form in his son's eyes, Michael does something different. He kneels down to get to Leo's eye level. He looks directly into his son's eyes, and his voice is a little shaky as he speaks. "You know, Leo," he says, "when I was your age, I used to climb huge trees, real trees, with rough bark and branches that swayed in the wind. It was scary, I won't lie, but the view from up there, the view of the world from those branches, was incredible. It was one of the best feelings I ever had. He stands up and takes a step back, giving his son space. I'll be here if you need me, but I know you can do it. I trust you. Leo looks at his father with an expression Michael has never seen before. Then he looks at the wall again. A new light shines in his eyes. It's the light of permission, the light of trust, the light of possibility. And then, without asking again, without seeking more reassurance, Leo begins to climb. Michael watches, his heart beating faster than normal in his chest. He's not free from fear. Maybe he'll never be completely free from it, and maybe that's okay. But for the first time in a long, long time, fear isn't in control. Fear isn't making the decisions. He is. He's no longer just asking questions about the cage. He's becoming the answer. He's living it. And as he watches his son climb higher, he understands something profound. This journey isn't just his particular struggle. It's a silent invitation extended to everyone who's watching, to everyone who feels the same low hum of fear, to everyone who's tired of living in a cage. The final question isn't whether the world is dangerous. It always has been dangerous, and always will be. The question is, who do we choose to be in the face of that danger? Do we choose to be prisoners in a safe cage where nothing bad can happen, but also nothing good can happen? Or do we choose to be explorers on an uncertain journey where we might fall, but we might also fly? The choice in the end is ours. If you're choosing to be an explorer, hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for being part of this journey.